Say hi to the sharks, my daughter-in-law whispered as she shoved me off the yacht. My son Michael just stood there smiling. Their plan was simple: steal my $3 billion fortune. But when they returned home later that evening, I was already sitting in my favorite armchair with a very special gift waiting for them. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up and tell you how an ordinary Tuesday morning ended, with me plunging into the Atlantic Ocean. I suppose I should have seen it coming, but at 67, I still believed family meant something. That blood was thicker than seawater, if you'll forgive the pun. The morning had started beautifully. Michael had called me personally, not through his assistant, which should have been my first red flag. He invited me on what he called a celebration cruise aboard his new yacht. "Mom, we want to toast your recovery from surgery," he'd said, his voice warm with what I mistook for genuine affection. Just the three of us, like a real family. Had been recovering from my hip replacement for 6 weeks, and honestly, I was desperate for any sign that my son and his wife, Cassandra, still wanted me in their lives. Ever since my husband, Richard, died 2 years ago, leaving me his tech empire fortune, things between us had felt different, colder. So I dressed carefully that morning, slipping into my navy blue dress, the one Richard always said made my eyes sparkle, and took a taxi to the marina. The yacht was magnificent, a gleaming white vessel that probably cost more than most people's houses. Michael greeted me at the dock with an embrace that felt rehearsed, while Cassandra watched from the deck, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Isn't she beautiful?" Michael asked, gesturing proudly toward the boat, 42 feet of pure luxury. "We're thinking of taking her to the Caribbean next month." What he didn't mention was that they'd bought it with the money I'd given them last year to invest in his consulting firm. $3 million I was beginning to suspect had never seen the inside of a business account. The first hour was pleasant enough. We sailed into calm waters, the Massachusetts coastline shrinking behind us. Cassandra served mimosas and chattered about their plans to renovate the house. My old house, which I had signed over to them after Richard died, thinking downsizing to the condo would be simpler. But then Michael's questions started. Casual at first. My will, the trust arrangements, whether I'd considered making changes to simplify things for them. "It's just that probate can be so complicated, Mom," he said, topping off my champagne with a little too much enthusiasm. "We want to make sure everything's taken care of." That's when I noticed Cassandra filming me with her phone, not openly, subtle, at an angle, pretending to take selfies while secretly recording me as I drank and discussed financial matters. Building evidence. The pieces clicked together with chilling clarity. The surgery I'd had, they had insisted on handling my paperwork afterward. The power of attorney documents they'd slipped in at the hospital, claiming it was temporary, just to help with bills. My financial advisor suddenly cutting off communication. "Michael," I said carefully, setting down my glass, "I'd like to go back to shore now." That's when his mask slipped. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom." His voice was different now, harder. "We need to have a conversation about your health, about your memory issues." Memory issues? I was sharper than both of them combined. "You've been showing signs of dementia," Cassandra added, stepping closer. "We have it documented. The doctors agree you're no longer capable of managing your financial affairs." "That's absurd," I snapped. But even as the words left my mouth, I realized how carefully they had orchestrated this. The boat was miles from shore, no other vessels in sight, just the three of us, the endless ocean, and their plan to either force me to sign everything over, or, "Mom, we're trying to help you," Michael said softly, though his eyes were cold as winter. "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." I stood slowly, my hip aching but my mind crystal clear. "And if I refuse?" That's when Cassandra smiled. Really smiled. For the first time all day. Well, an elderly woman, fresh out of surgery, probably took too many pain meds, got disoriented on the boat. Cassandra shrugged. Tragic accidents happened all the time. I stared at them, fury burning hotter than the salt air. I had raised this man from diapers. I'd taught him to ride a bike, paid for his college, his wedding, his house, and now he stood there nodding along while his wife calmly plotted my death. "You're both insane if you think you'll get away with this." "Actually, Mom," Michael said smoothly, pulling out a folder of papers, "we've thought it through very carefully. Your signature, here, transferring all assets to us immediately, for your own protection, and we all go home happy." I looked at the documents, at my son's expectant face, at Cassandra's phone, still recording. Then I looked at the ocean, vast, dark, dangerous, and somehow less terrifying than the two people who were supposed to love me. Go to hell, I said. That's when Cassandra stepped behind me and whispered those words about sharks. The push wasn't violent, they were too clever for that. Just a sudden shove while I was off balance, gazing out at the water. Over I went, navy dress and all, into the cold Atlantic. As I plunged under, I heard Michael's voice screaming, "Mom! Oh, God, Mom!" But beneath it, I caught Cassandra's lower tone, speaking into the phone. Double quotes, "Yes, we'll need you to file the emergency petition first thing Monday morning. She's clearly not competent to." Then the water swallowed me whole. I'm a strong swimmer. Richard and I used to do laps together every morning, but the icy shock stole my breath, and my heavy clothes dragged me down. I kicked off my shoes, broke the surface, gasping, just in time to see the yacht speeding away. They were actually leaving me there to die. That's when I saw it. A fishing boat. Captain Jake Morrison was exactly the kind of man who'd leap into shark-infested waters to save a drowning grandmother. 60-something, weathered by decades on the ocean, with a moral compass my own family seemed to lack. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" he asked as he and his teenage grandson hauled me onto their vessel. I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth clattering so hard I could barely form words. Jake wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of salt and motor oil, while his grandson, Tyler, fired up the engine. My family," I stammered. "The yacht, we saw them take off like a bat out of hell," Jake said grimly. "Didn't look back once." What kind of people leave someone floating in the middle of the ocean? The kind who inherit $3 billion if I'm not around to stop them, I thought. But out loud I only said, the kind who aren't really family. Jake radioed the Coast Guard while Tyler tucked another blanket around me. "This is the Molly Sue. Got a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Gloucester. She's conscious, responsive, but needs medical attention." "Wait," I grabbed Jake's arm. "Please, don't let them know you found me." "Not yet." Jake studied me with the sharp eyes of a man who'd seen enough life to know when someone was running from more than just cold water. "You in some kind of trouble?" "Yes," I said, trembling, "but not the kind you're thinking. I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived. Can you help me?" Tyler looked at his grandfather uncertainly. "Grandpa, shouldn't we and shouldn't funny things," Jake said slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like following the rules." He keyed the radio again. "Coast Guard, this is Molly Sue. False alarm on that rescue. Turned out to be debris in the water. All clear." As we turned toward a small private dock, Jake already knew. I told them everything about Michael and Cassandra, the money, the documents they had shoved in front of me. Jake listened without interrupting, his face darkening with each word. "So, they figured they'd rather be rich orphans than broke kids with a living mother," Jake muttered when I finished. "Apparently. So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? As far as Michael and Cassandra knew, I was already dead. They would return to shore, call the authorities, report me missing overboard, play the grieving family while quietly executing whatever legal documents they had prepared. But here's the thing about being dead. It gives you options you never had while you were alive. "I'm going to let them think they won," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "And then, I'm going to destroy them." Jake grinned for the first time since pulling me from the water. "Now that," he said, "sounds like a plan worth helping with." Tyler dropped us at a hidden dock in a secluded cove I'd never seen before. Jake knew a woman there who ran a modest bed and breakfast. No questions asked. Cash only. Her name was Mrs. Chun, a tough woman in her 70s. She took one look at my bedraggled state and immediately started heating soup. She didn't even blink when Jake explained I needed a place to stay off the books. "Honey, I've been running this place for 30 years, she said, ladling out steaming chicken broth. "I've seen people running from all kinds of things. Long as you're not bringing violence to my door, you're welcome." That evening, while Michael and Cassandra were presumably filing police reports about their tragically missing mother, I sat in Mrs. Chen's warm kitchen, wrapped in borrowed clothes, planning their downfall. Jake agreed to be my eyes and ears. His fishing boat doubled as a charter business, which meant he was constantly around the marina where Michael kept his yacht. He could monitor their movements, overhear conversations, maybe even dig up some information of his own. Here's what I don't understand, I said, sipping my third cup of coffee. How were they planning to make this legal? Even if I died accidentally, there would be investigations, procedures. That's been bothering me too, Jake admitted. They had to have more than just forged papers. Someone on the inside, pulling strings. That night, I made a list of everyone who'd had access to my financial information since Richard's death: my lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, the bank managers, the trust officers. Someone had been feeding Michael and Cassandra information, helping them plan this, and I was going to find out who. But first, I needed to know exactly what story they were telling about my disappearance. Mrs. Chen had an old computer with internet access. I spent hours reading the news reports about the tragic boating accident that had supposedly claimed the life of Richard Harrison's widow. The articles painted me as a frail, elderly woman with a declining mind. Michael was quoted extensively, lamenting my confusion and memory issues in recent months. Cassandra had apparently sobbed to reporters about how worried they had been for my safety. They even included a photo. Me at Michael's birthday party last year, looking slightly bewildered as I held a drink. I remembered that night clearly. It had been a surprise party, and no one had bothered to tell me. I'd arrived expecting a quiet family dinner, only to find 20 strangers crammed into my former home. But in the photo, I didn't look surprised. I looked lost, old, exactly the image they wanted to project. The obituary was already online. Margaret Harrison, beloved mother and grandmother, passed away in a tragic boating accident while enjoying an outing with her devoted family. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in death, they were twisting the narrative, turning me into a confused, helpless woman to justify their lies. Bastards, I muttered, slamming the laptop shut. Mrs. Chen looked up from her knitting. Planning something special for them. Oh yes, I said darkly. Something very special indeed. The funeral was surprisingly well attended for someone supposedly dying of dementia. I watched from across the cemetery, hidden behind a maintenance shed, binoculars pressed to my eyes. Jake had borrowed them from his fishing gear. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the proceedings. Michael had spared no expense. A premium casket empty. Of course, elaborate floral arrangements, a glossy program with my smiling face printed on the front. He and Cassandra stood at the graveside, dressed in perfectly coordinated black, accepting condolences from friends, business associates, and people I barely recognized. What struck me most was how genuinely sad some of the mourners looked. My neighbor, Eleanor, was crying openly. My book club friends had come. Even Dr. Peterson, the surgeon who had performed my hip replacement, stood there looking somber. These people truly cared about me. And yet, Michael and Cassandra were standing at the graveside, graciously accepting their sympathy, while knowing full well I was alive. See anything interesting? Jake whispered, crouching beside me. Besides my son giving an Oscar-worthy performance, I muttered. Look at who's not there, Jake said, adjusting his binoculars. Like who? My financial advisor, Richard Barnes. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh. My accountant, Michael Torres. I lowered my own binoculars, the pieces clicking into place. The people who would normally never miss the funeral of a client worth $3 billion were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they're busy with the estate, I said slowly. Maybe, Jake said grimly. Or, maybe they can't look people in the eye while they're part of this scheme. After the service, I watched Michael and Cassandra work the crowd like seasoned politicians, shaking hands, accepting hugs, playing the grieving family to perfection. But I also noticed how quickly they steered people away whenever the questions got too specific about my final days. That afternoon, Jake drove me back to Mrs. Chun's in his pickup truck, weaving through backstreets to avoid any chance encounters. I had been officially dead for 4 days now, and I was beginning to understand the strange advantages of my situation. I need to get into my old house, I told him as we pulled into Mrs. Chen's driveway. That seems dangerous. They're probably staying there now, right? Not according to the property records I looked up this morning. I pulled out a paper where I'd been scribbling notes. They kept their own place. My house has been sitting empty since I moved to the condo last year. But here's the interesting part. Someone's been paying the utilities, electricity, water, heating. Someone's keeping it up. Why would they do that if no one's living there? Jake frowned. Good question. I think it's time I found out. That night, Jake dropped me off 3 blocks from my former home in Beacon Hill. the house where Richard and I had lived for 35 years, where I'd raised Michael, where we'd hosted countless dinner parties and holidays. The house I had signed over to my son because I thought family meant something. It was just past midnight. The street was quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional passing car. I still had my key. Michael had never thought to ask for it back, and so, like a criminal breaking into my own home, I slipped through the back door. The house felt different, not empty, exactly, but wrong. I crept through the familiar rooms, moving carefully with the small flashlight Jake had given me, avoiding windows that faced the street. The living room furniture was draped in sheets, but I immediately noticed new pieces. Expensive pieces. A leather sofa that cost more than most people's cars. A gleaming entertainment system that hadn't been there before. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was not stocked with the few basics you'd expect in a vacant house. No, this was filled with fresh food, imported cheeses, organic vegetables, premium wine, the kind of groceries that suggested someone was living there regularly. But it was in the home office. Richard's old study where I found what I had come for. The desk was littered with documents, legal papers, financial statements, and worst of all, a detailed timeline labeled the Margaret Project. My name turned into a code word for my elimination. My hands shook with rage as I snapped photos of every page using the disposable camera Jake had given me. They had been planning this for over a year, carefully documenting what they claimed were signs of my mental deterioration. Doctor visits where they had coached me to seem confused. Social situations deliberately engineered to make me look disoriented. The birthday party photos splashed in the newspaper. They had intentionally withheld the fact it was a surprise party, then photographed my bewildered reaction. Even the medication mix-up 3 months ago, the one that landed me in the emergency room, they had switched my prescription bottles. Every moment of confusion, every slip of memory, every instance where I'd seemed off balance or forgetful, it had all been carefully staged, orchestrated, documented as evidence of dementia. But the most chilling discovery was a letter, a single sheet of paper, signed only with the initials, Mount. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Margaret's been asking too many questions about the power of attorney documents. If she gets suspicious and goes to a lawyer independently, everything falls apart. I recommend moving to Phase 3 within the next 2 weeks. Phase 3, according to the timeline, that meant my death. I was photographing the last page when I heard a car door slamming outside. Headlights swept across the front windows. Voices carried up the walkway. Michael and Cassandra, coming home from their performance of grief. Panic surged through me. I snatched the camera, gathered the documents back into rough piles, and moved for the back door. But as I crept toward the exit, their voices drifted inside with them. "Think the Peterson woman bought it?" Michael asked, casual as if discussing the weather. "She was crying too hard to think straight." Cassandra replied, "Besides, what's she going to investigate? Mom fell off a boat. It happens. What about the will? How long before we can move forward? Probate opens Monday. MT says we'll have full access to the accounts within 6 weeks." I froze at the threshold, my heart hammering. Then I slipped out into the night, through the garden I had once tended lovingly, crouching behind the rose bushes I had planted 20 years ago. That's when I heard it. A baby crying. The sound pierced the night air, thin and insistent. A baby inside my former house. Michael and Cassandra had never mentioned children. In fact, they had been vocal about not wanting them, yet claiming they were too focused on their careers. Which meant this wasn't just about money. This was something far darker. By the time Jake picked me up 15 minutes later, I was still shaking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Worse," I whispered. "I've seen my replacement." I told him everything: the baby, the documents, the mysterious Mount who seemed to be pulling strings from behind the curtain. "A baby," Jake repeated slowly, his weathered brow furrowed. "They never mentioned having a kid. Not once." "Never," I confirmed. "And Cassandra certainly didn't look like a woman who had just given birth 4 days ago on that yacht." I pulled out the disposable camera. "I need these photos developed, but not anywhere they might have connections." Jake nodded grimly. "I know a guy in Gloucester, no questions asked." While we waited in his truck, sipping burnt gas station coffee, we tried to piece together the puzzle. "They've been planning this for over a year," Jake said, scanning my notes. "Systematically making you look incompetent, documenting every staged mistake, and with someone inside your financial team feeding them information. And now," I cut in, my voice low, there's a baby. Which means they've either been lying all along about not wanting kids. I stopped, the thought forming even as I spoke. Or the baby isn't theirs. Jake turned sharply. You think they stole a baby? I think they did something, I said, my pulse racing. And I think Mount whoever that is knows exactly what. When the photos were finally developed, the evidence was damning. Pages of timelines, falsified medical records, financial projections showing how they planned to spend my fortune. A conspiracy laid out in black and white. But the most disturbing image was the last one, a birth certificate, tucked under the pile of papers. Baby Harrison, born 3 weeks ago. Mother, Cassandra Harrison. Father, Michael Harrison. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. I was just with Cassandra 4 days ago, I whispered. She was drinking champagne, strutting across that yacht in designer heels. She wasn't recovering from childbirth, not even close. I looked up at Jake, my hands trembling. This certificate is fake, completely fabricated. So the question is, I swallowed hard. Whose baby is it? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in Mrs. Chen's guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of her old house. My son and daughter-in-law had spent over a year destroying my reputation, planning my murder, forging documents to steal my fortune. And now there was a baby caught in the middle of it. Asterisk, they bought a baby. Jake's words hung heavy in the air. Looks like it, I said slowly. And not just any baby. They specifically requested a newborn who could pass for their biological child. According to Jake's contact at Whitmore, the arrangements had been made 8 months ago, paid in cash with instructions to have a forged birth certificate ready in advance. Mrs. Chen placed 3 steaming cups of coffee on the table and sat with us. So, they planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone inside your financial team helping them. About that, Jake said, pulling out another photo. I think I found Mount. He slid the photo across the table. Woman in her 40s, with short auburn hair and an expensive leather briefcase, shaking hands with Michael outside a downtown law office. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. Miranda Torres, Jake explained, partner at Morrison, Torres and Associates. They handle estate planning for several of Boston's wealthiest families. Torres, I repeated slowly. Wait, Michael Torres is my accountant. Are they related? Married, Jake confirmed. And here's where it gets interesting. Miranda has been quietly building a client base of wealthy elderly individuals with strained family relationships. She specializes in something she calls family transition planning. Recognition clicked into place like a knife in my gut. I met her 6 months ago. Some charity event Michael dragged me to. She was very interested in my estate planning, kept asking questions about my trust structures. I'll bet she was, Jake muttered. Because Miranda Torres has a very specific business model. She identifies wealthy seniors with complicated family dynamics. Then she helps the families accelerate their inheritance through what she calls compassionate intervention. You mean murder? Mrs. Chen said flatly. Jake's expression hardened. I mean, she creates airtight legal frameworks so the families can seize control of assets while the elder is still alive, under claims of incompetence, dementia, or diminished capacity. She's done it at least 6 times in the past 3 years. He spread out more photos, grainy surveillance shots of Miranda meeting with different families, entering law offices, visiting what looked like private medical facilities, running a full-scale operation, Jake said. She finds greedy relatives, manufactures evidence of mental decline, arranges medical testimony, sets up the legal cover for asset transfers. And in return, she takes a substantial cut of the inheritance. And if the target resists, Carol Peterson opened the door. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with tired eyes but a genuine warmth about her. She wore scrubs decorated with cheerful cartoon animals and held a baby bottle in one hand. Can I help you? She asked politely. Hello, Carol. My name is Margaret Harrison. I believe you're caring for my grandson. The blood drained from her face. She knew that Namit had been all over the news for the past week. You're dead. She, STAMMERED. Double quotes, yes. I've been reading about that myself. I smiled faintly. Fascinating story, though not entirely accurate. May I come in? I think we need to talk. She stepped back slowly, still staring at me like I was a ghost. But you died. In the papers. On the news. Your son said, my son said a lot of things. I cut in, stepping into the house. Apparently not all of them true. I followed her into the living room, my living room, where a baby sat in a bouncy seat, gurgling happily. The sight hit me like a punch. "Oh," I breathed. "Oh, you beautiful thing." The baby was perfect, maybe 3 weeks old, dark hair, serious brown eyes, dressed in an expensive outfit, surrounded by top-of-the-line baby gear that must have cost thousands. "What's his name?" I asked softly, settling closer. I eased into a chair beside the bouncy seat. "Baby Harrison," Carol said automatically, then caught herself. They said his name was going to be Robert Jr., after his grandfather. But they haven't decided for sure." "They haven't decided," I said softly, "because they don't know him well enough to name him. Because he's not really their baby, is he?" Carol sat heavily on the sofa, confusion clouding her face. "I don't understand what's happening. You're supposed to be dead. And Michael and Cassandra, they're supposed to be grieving parents who just needed help with their newborn while dealing with family matters." "Carol," I said firmly, leaning forward, "I need you to listen very carefully. This baby is not Michael and Cassandra's biological child. They purchased him through an illegal surrogacy arrangement that ended in the death of his birth mother, and 6 days ago, they tried to murder me so they could steal my inheritance and raise this child as their heir. That's impossible." I pulled out the photos Jake had taken, the documents I'd copied from Michael's office, the evidence of Miranda Torres's criminal empire. I spread them across the coffee table, watching Carol's expression shift from doubt to shock to horror as the truth became undeniable. "The teenage girl who gave birth to this baby was named Sarah Collins," I said gently, 17 years old. No family, no safety net. She was told she was helping a loving couple who couldn't have children. She died during delivery under very suspicious circumstances. Tears welled in Carol's eyes as she looked at the baby, her arms tightening around him. He's an orphan." "Yes," I whispered. "And if Michael and Cassandra succeed, he'll grow up believing they're his parents, never knowing his real mother died to give him life." Carol's voice broke. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to document everything," I said. "Take photos, record notes, keep track of what they tell you, how they treat him, who else comes to the house. And then, I want you to help me make sure this child grows up knowing the truth about where he came from." Carol wiped her tears and nodded. "Then his real name should be Robert Sarah Harrison after his grandfather and his birth mother." "That's perfect," I said softly. I spent the next hour with Carol and little Robert, Sarah taking pictures, documenting the setup inside what used to be my home, and explaining what would happen next. Carol agreed to keep caring for him, while secretly gathering evidence and keeping me updated on Michael and Cassandra's activities. "They'll be back around noon," she warned as I prepared to leave. "They always come home for lunch, make calls, handle business." "Perfect," I said. "By then, they'll have received my first message." While I'd been talking to Carol, Jake had been busy downtown, parked across from Miranda Torres's office. He'd used a telephoto lens to capture photos of Michael and Cassandra meeting with her, shaking hands over what they believed was my death certificate. But the real blow came from what Jake delivered while they were inside, a note, written by me, on my best stationery. "Dear Michael and Cassandra, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful." The note was hand-delivered at exactly 11:47 a.m., according to Jake, who watched from across the street. All three of them, Michael, Cassandra, and Miranda Torres, came rushing out of the building within minutes, their faces white with panic. The psychological warfare had begun. That afternoon, when they returned to my former house, expecting their comfortable conspiracy to be intact, they would instead discover that their dead victim had been very busy indeed, because I wasn't just alive, I was angry, I was armed with evidence, and I was ready for war. I sat waiting in my favorite armchair, the one Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. When Michael and Cassandra came through the door, I had positioned myself so I would be the first thing they saw. The look on their faces was worth 6 days in the Atlantic Ocean. Double quotes. "Hello, darlings," I said. Asterisk pleasantly, I said, not bothering to rise from my chair. "How was your meeting? I do hope you didn't sign anything important while I was away." Cassandra screamed, not a startled shriek, a full, blood-curdling scream like she had just seen her worst nightmare come to life. Which, in a way, she had. Michael froze in the doorway, keys still clutched in his hand, staring at me like I might vanish if he blinked hard enough. Surprised, I asked lightly. I must say, the reports of my death were terribly premature, though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations. Really, that was a nice touch. Just then Carol appeared from the kitchen, carrying baby Robert Sarah as we had arranged. She looked nervous, but resolute. Mrs. Harrison asked me to bring the baby out, she said softly. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. Her grandson? Cassandra's voice cracked, hoarse with disbelief. Yes, I supplied helpfully. We've covered that part already. Turns out drowning is harder than it looks, especially when there are good people willing to pull you out of the water. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, we thought the Coast Guard said. The Coast Guard searched for debris, not survivors, I interrupted coldly. Funny how that works when no one actually reports a person overboard. I accepted the baby from Carol, settling him carefully in my arms. I looked down at him, my voice softening. Hello, little Robert. Sarah, I'm your real grandmother, not the kind who tries to buy you with blood money. His name isn't Robert, Sarah, Cassandra snapped, her composure starting to creep back. His name is whatever we decide to call him, because he's our son. Is he? I asked, meeting her eyes. Tell me, Cassandra, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht, you certainly didn't look like someone recovering from labor 3 weeks earlier. Her lips tightened. The birth was private. At least 6 other cases, I continued, laying down another set of documents, where Miranda Torres provided legal cover for families who wanted their elderly relatives dead. 6 other families where the decline was carefully manufactured, slipped into tea, medications tampered with until the deaths looked like accidents. I pulled out the first file. Like Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, age 73. She fell down the stairs 3 weeks after her son started lacing her nightly tea with sedatives. He inherited $2 million. Michael had gone pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Or Mr. Charles Bennett, I continued, holding up another page. 68, died in a single-car accident after his daughter convinced his doctor to adjust his medication. She inherited $4 million. I locked eyes with my son. These aren't theories, Michael. These are murders. And you are part of the same operation. We never killed anyone, Cassandra blurted. Her voice shook, but she said it quickly, too quickly. Even if what you're saying about this Torres woman is true, we never actually hurt anyone. Really, I snapped. What about Sarah Collins? Silence. I slammed another file onto the table. What about the 17-year-old girl, whose baby you bought? The girl who died during childbirth under suspicious circumstances. The girl whose death gave you the heir you needed to justify inheriting my fortune. That wasn't we didn't know, Michael stammered, then stopped. Didn't know what? That Miranda Torres was running a black market baby ring with vulnerable teenage girls. Didn't know those girls had a habit of dying during delivery. Didn't know you were accessories to murder. I held up Sarah's death certificate, which Jake had obtained through his contacts. Cause of death, unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But according to the nurse who was there, Sarah was young, healthy, with no risk factors, showed no signs of distress until minutes after Miranda Torres herself administered a so-called routine injection. Carol had returned quietly, standing in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth. The same nurse, I added, who later told my investigator that Torres was present during the delivery, and that Sarah Collins died within minutes of her interference. Your investigator? Michael asked weakly. Oh yes, I said, smiling coldly. Did you think I was doing this alone? I have a private investigator. Surveillance photos, financial records, medical documents, testimony, and I have something else you might find even more interesting. I walked over to what had once been Richard's desk and slid open the top drawer. From it, I pulled a small digital recorder. I've been recording this entire conversation, I said evenly. Every word, every excuse, every slip, every admission you've made. I held the device up, my smile turning razor sharp. You know that in Massachusetts, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. And since this is taking place in what used to be my home, I think I qualify. Cassandra jumped to her feet, her voice shrill. You can't use that. It sits entrapment or something. Actually, I said calmly, it's evidence. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Evidence that will put both of you in prison for a very long time. Michael finally spoke, his voice cracking. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed. and it wasn't pleasant. I want my money back. I want that baby placed with a real family who will love him and tell him the truth about his mother. I want Miranda Torres arrested for the serial killer she is. And I want you two to spend the rest of your lives remembering that you tried to murder your own mother for money. And if we cooperate, Cassandra asked, quietly. If you cooperate, I said, leaning forward, I might consider not pressing charges for attempted murder. The fraud charges, the conspiracy, the accessory to murder charges, those are out of my hands now. But attempted murder, that's mine to give, or not. I looked at them, these two people who had shared my home, my table, my holidays, who had plotted my death with the same casual precision one might use to plan a vacation. You have 24 hours to decide, but they chose poorly. Instead of confessing, instead of cooperating, instead of showing even a flicker of remorse, Michael and Cassandra decided to double down. The next morning, at exactly 6 o'clock, the phone at Mrs. Chun's bed and breakfast rang. Danny Crawford's voice was urgent, with no preamble. They're moving fast. I've been monitoring their communications. They spent all night on the phone with Miranda Torres and someone else. Someone they kept calling the cleaner. I was instantly awake. What kind of cleaner? The kind who makes problems disappear permanently, Danny said grimly. They're planning to have you killed again, but this time, they want to make sure the body is found, so there's no doubt you're dead. Mrs. Chen, listening from the kitchen doorway, didn't hesitate. She started making calls immediately. Within 15 minutes, Jake Morrison was at our door with his pickup truck, ready to move us to a safe house Danny had arranged. How much time do we have? I asked as we sped through the pre-dawn darkness. Not much, Danny replied. The cleaner they hired is flying in from New York this morning. According to my sources, he specializes in making murders look like accidents, and his success rate, perfect. The safe house was a small cottage on a private island, accessible only by boat. Jake knew the owner, a fellow fisherman who owed him favors, and didn't ask questions. We arrived just as the sun began to bleed over the Atlantic horizon. This is insane, I muttered, gripping a mug of coffee at the cottage's kitchen table. My own son hired a professional killer to finish the job. People do terrible things for money, Jake said darkly, but we're not letting them get away with it. An hour later, Danny arrived with even more disturbing news. Worse than we thought, he said, spreading photographs and documents across the table. Miranda Torres isn't just running an inheritance scam. She's part of a larger network. They've been targeting wealthy elderly people across New England for years. He pointed to file after file. At least 20 suspicious deaths in the last 5 years. All elderly, all wealthy, all with greedy heirs. Every single one ruled accidental or natural, despite circumstances that should have raised alarms. How are they getting away with it? I asked, horrified. They've got people inside the system, Danny said flatly. Medical examiners, police detectives, probate judges. It's not just a family racket. It's organized crime with a very specific target demographic. Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on coming with us despite the danger, studied a surveillance photo carefully. This woman here, she said, tapping the image. I've seen her before, at the hospital where I volunteer. About 6 months ago, she was asking about elderly patients with no visitors. Said she was from a social services agency. Danny and I exchanged a look. She was scouting for targets, he said grimly. Jake folded his arms. And now they're coming after you, Margaret, because you're the first person to survive one of their operations, and the only one who can testify about it. Then we make sure my testimony is heard before they can silence me, I said firmly. The rest, they think I'm trading my life for the babies, I told Jake as his boat cut through the cold Atlantic waters toward Gloucester. What they don't know is that I've been planning this for days. Carol Peterson had already planted the recording devices throughout the house while Michael and Cassandra were away. She had also set up cameras in strategic spots and planned to hide in the basement with baby Robert Sarah, ready to escape through the old servant's entrance if things went wrong. You sure about this? Jake asked as we docked. I'm sure that if I don't do this, an innocent baby will die because of my son's greed, I said, and that's something I will not allow. At exactly 6 o'clock, I walked up to my former front door. Michael answered, looking haggard, terrified. Mom, he whispered. For just a moment, I heard my little boy again, the child I had raised, loved, sacrificed everything for. Hello, David, I said evenly. I'm here, as promised. Cassandra was pacing in the living room, her nerves fraying. "She'll be here soon," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Miranda Torres," I said. "She wants to talk to you." "I'm sure she does, Mom." Michael's voice faltered. "I never wanted it to go this far." "But you let it," I said, simply. "You let it go this far because $3 billion was worth more to you than your mother's life." He couldn't meet my eyes. Miranda Torres arrived at precisely 7. She was smaller than I expected, a neat, professional-looking woman who could have been anyone's accountant or lawyer, which in fact, she was. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, pleasantly, extending her hand as if we were at a cocktail party. "I'm so glad you survived your boating accident. We have a great deal to discuss." "I'm sure we do." She sat across from me in what used to be my living room, opened a leather portfolio, and began speaking as though this were just another client negotiation. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble for my clients," she said smoothly. "Michael and Cassandra followed my instructions precisely, and yet, here you are, very much enlivened, apparently well-informed about matters that don't concern you." "Murder concerns me," I said sharply, "especially when it's my own." Torres's lips curved into a cold smile. "I prefer to think of what we do as estate planning acceleration, helping families access inheritances that would otherwise be locked up in years of probate. We provide a valuable service to people who understand that time is money." "And what about the elderly people you kill?" I shot back. "What service do you provide to them?" "Peace," she said without hesitation. "An end to the confusion and fear of cognitive decline. A dignified death that allows their families to remember them as they weren't, as they became." I stared at her, astonished by her ability to rationalize mass murder. "How many?" She tilted her head. "How many what? How many people have you killed?" Torres glanced down at her portfolio, as if checking her schedule. "Over the past 5 years, my clients and I have successfully resolved 37 cases involving elderly individuals whose continued existence was creating financial and emotional hardship for their families. 30-7 murders." And she was confessing to me as calmly as if she were reciting the week's appointments. Asterisk, 37 murders, she said, as casually as if she were listing tax returns. "And you're planning to make me number 38? I asked. Miranda Torres smiled. "Oh, Mrs. Harrison, I'm afraid you'll actually be number 39. We had to resolve another matter earlier today, a gentleman who was becoming too curious about our operations. But yes, you, unfortunately, require another accident. A more permanent one this time. And the baby," I pressed. She didn't hesitate. "Tragic carbon monoxide leak. These old houses' faulty heating systems can be so dangerous." I turned to look at Michael and Cassandra, frozen on the sofa like mannequins. "This is what you wanted. Not just my death, but the death of an innocent baby." Neither spoke. "The baby is a loose end," Torres continued coldly. "His existence complicates the inheritance structure, and his origins raise too many questions. Much simpler to eliminate him now and claim David and Cassandra are tragically childless, deserving of sympathy and the kind of emotional support only significant wealth can provide." That's when I smiled. For the first time since she walked in. "Miss Torres," I said pleasantly, "I think there's something you should know." Her eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "You're under arrest." The FBI burst through every door simultaneously, front, back, basement. Even the windows agents swarmed the room, weapons drawn, voices commanding. They'd been listening the whole time, recording Miranda Torres's confession to 37 murders and her plans to commit to more. "Miranda Torres," Agent Sarah Chen announced, her voice ringing out like a gavel, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." Torres bolted, making a desperate dash for the kitchen. She got 6 feet before 3 agents slammed her to the hardwood floor. Michael and Cassandra just sat there in stunned silence as Agent Chen read them their rights. Then she turned to me, her expression softening into a smile. "Mrs. Harrison, that was extremely dangerous, and extremely well done. It turned out Danny Crawford wasn't just a private investigator. He was a former FBI agent working undercover to expose the elder abuse network Torres had built. My case," Agent Chen explained later, as crime scene technicians swarmed the house, "was the perfect opportunity to push Torres into confessing. We'd been tracking her for 2 years. She was too careful, too smart, never got her own hands dirty, always used intermediaries, always plausible deniability. Until today, I said. Until today, when she confessed to murders on federal recording equipment while planning 2 more. Carol Peterson emerged from the basement, baby Robert Sarah safe in her arms. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I confirmed, holding out my hands to take the baby. At least the dangerous part is. The legal part took months. Michael and Cassandra were both charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, elder abuse, and accessory to murder in the death of Sarah Collins. They accepted plea deals, 25 years from Michael, 24 Cassandra. Miranda Torres went to trial. She was convicted on all counts, life in prison, no possibility of parole. The network she had built unraveled. 17 other conspirators were arrested: corrupt doctors, crooked lawyers, probate judges, and greedy relatives who had played their part in the killings. The investigation revealed that more than $200 million had been stolen from elderly victims across 6 states. But the most important outcome wasn't the money, it was the baby. I legally adopted him, with the full support of the court and Sarah Collins's extended family, who were eventually located in Canada. They were grateful that someone would raise Sarah's son, and that he would grow up knowing the truth about the brave young mother who gave her life to bring him into the world. His real name is Robert Sarah Harrison, I told the judge. Robert for his grandfather, Sarah for his birth mother. Harrison because he'll be raised by a family that loves him enough to tell him the truth. The judge, a dignified woman in her 60s who had followed the case closely, smiled warmly. I think Sarah Collins would be proud of how her story ended. I'm 72 years old now, and for the first time in a long time, I finally feel alive. Now, 5 years later, Robert Sarah is a remarkable little boy who knows exactly who he is and where he came from. He knows his birth mother was a brave teenager named Sarah who wanted him to have a good life. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost Sarah her life. And he knows that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the very ones you need to protect yourself from. Mrs. Chen still runs her bed and breakfast, though these days she's added a sideline as a consultant, helping other elderly people who suspect their families may not have their best interests at heart. Jake Morrison still runs his fishing charters, but he's also become something of a local legend, the fisherman who once pulled a drowning grandmother out of the Atlantic Ocean. And Danny Crawford, Agent Crawford, still works for the FBI, but every Christmas, he sends me a card with photos of other elderly people whose lives he's managed to save. As for Michael and Cassandra, they're still in prison. Michael writes me letters, sometimes long, rambling excuses about how he was manipulated, how it wasn't really his fault, asking for forgiveness. I don't write back, because here's what I learned during my week as a dead woman. Family isn't about blood, or obligation, or inheritance. Family is about showing up when someone needs you, protecting the vulnerable, choosing love over greed every single day. Robert, Sarah, and we have that kind of family now. The kind where no one gets pushed off boats, no one steals trust funds, and no one has to die for someone else to get rich. It's a much better family than the one I was born into, and certainly better than the one I raised. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments, because your voice matters.